That big change, the world's richest man, Elon Musk, has taken over Twitter after a $44 billion deal. Musk tweeted, and I'm quoting, "The bird is freed." With the takeover, dramatic changes are already visible. It's time up for Twitter CEO Parag Agrawal and many other top executives. What kind of changes will this herald in the world of social media? Social media, which now affects democracies and political discourses. First up, a special report.
I think it's very important for there to be an inclusive arena for free speech.
It's official. Elon Musk now owns Twitter, and he's already fired 3 top executives. That's according to 2 sources familiar with the decision. So what does that mean for users? The answer could start with money.
Musk is paying a pretty hefty price.
About $44 billion to be precise. The owner of Tesla and SpaceX completed the purchase last night.
Twitter has challenges as a growth platform. That's why there's no second bidder.
Before the final deal, analyst Dan Ives speculated on how Musk could earn back his money. He says Twitter might leverage advertising and could become a subscription service. Users also might notice this difference.
We want to be just very reluctant to delete things, just be very cautious with permanent bans. Timeouts, I think, are better.
Musk tweeted a statement saying he still plans to impose consequences on people who misuse the platform, but it's not clear what that means.
When he says he believes in free speech, does he take care of that? Does he get rid of the N-word that I'm often called?
When it comes to Twitter bans, some wonder about one user in particular.
Will Donald Trump come back?
That remains to be seen.
Well, the implications are far beyond Donald Trump. Joining us on the broadcast is Mark Stewart from New York. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today evening. Thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast today. What does this takeover by Elon Musk signify? What are we likely to witness? That's the question.
Yeah, that is the question. And I think that based off of our reporting, it sounds like that there may be a bit of a fundamental shift in the way that Twitter operates. Elon Musk yesterday, in a tweet to advertisers, made it very clear that he wants this to be a global town hall, if you will, a place to exchange ideas, which has very much been, I think, the early Twitter goal in all of this. He talked about an allegiance to humanity and using humility in this purchase. But the departure of 3 top executives in the C-suite shows, or is an indication that there could be a fundamental difference in philosophy and approach. And what I mean by that is the leaders in charge of Twitter now have been in favor of permanent bans about people who have said things that may have not been true or have been unkind or racist or sexist. Now, with their departure, it does open the way for Elon Musk to allow people, such as former President Trump, to return to the platform. That has not happened, but by systematically eliminating these 3 leaders in these top levels, the people who likely supported those philosophies of the past, it gives Elon Musk some room to do exactly what he wants.
It's well known, and that's the point you're hinting at, how social media plays a very crucial role in shaping political narratives. That's the modern reality. And from that point of view, and politically speaking, in terms of political discourse, public discourse, how you and I interact on Twitter, what kind of changes are we likely to witness?
Well, I think that is really the big question. I mean, that's a very good point you raise. I think that's what we are waiting to hear Elon Musk to outline. It's also going to be interesting to see about what he does with the platform beyond just a discussion point. He needs to get advertisers and he needs to make money. And so while we may enjoy having Twitter conversations, whether it be newsmakers or with friends, he also knows that there is a profit side to all of this. And he has brought up the idea of making a Twitter X, which would basically be an app where everything in your life could be handled. He wants to have encrypted direct messaging. So I think it's going to be interesting to see if he remains focused on Twitter as a conversation piece or as a broader app on our phones that could be used in our everyday lives beyond just conversation.
What kind of reactions have been witnessed in US? Different political parties, stakeholders. There's been a reaction from the Wall Street as well. The top executive, as you pointed out, in Twitter have faced the brunt. But the kind of reactions you witnessed through the day in US there?
Well, I think the reaction is everyone is kind of just holding their breath, waiting to see what he does next. Yeah. I haven't heard any real pointed outcry from any U.S. leader in particular, but this morning it was interesting because this is such a global platform. Thierry Breton, who is the EU Commissioner for Internal Markets, he made it very clear to Trump that, I'm going to read this tweet he said. He said, in Europe, the bird will fly by our EU rules. And as you may well know, in the European Union, the requirements for a digital property to operate are much stricter than they are here in the U.S. So at least in Europe, there is a warning to Musk to remember there are rules in play, maybe not in other parts of the world, but at least in Europe there are.
Interesting. As you pointed out, Musk is someone who's an absolutist in many sense when it comes to freedom of speech and expression. He doesn't want Twitter to be an echo chamber. That's what he said. Now, what kind of shift that can lead to for Twitter? And I'm thinking aloud with you. You rightly said all of us are waiting to see what really happens. But if we were to ideate, and what kind of shift in terms of discourses we can see in the social media?
I mean, there's speculation that, it may turn to be a little bit more of a conservative voice because some of the people that he has banned from Twitter, namely President Trump, have had, not as a conservative voice or, I think that it seems like in social media there have been different, party affiliations, if you will, associated with different apps. But I think there is concern that because of Twitter's reach, if Musk perhaps reduces the requirements, particularly when it comes to issues of truthfulness, that it really could cause some chaos. We are about a week and a half away from midterm elections here in the United States. And as we know, one way people get information, one way people get information that can influence their votes is through social media platforms. So if Musk were to, let's just say tomorrow night, say the rules of the past are gone and it can go back to the way it was, there are political implications as well as economical ones.
Absolutely, Mark. Thank you so much for your time, and it's been an absolute pleasure to have that conversation with you. So that's Mark Stewart from New York giving us a perspective about what to expect and what not to expect. Everybody's watching all the developments with a bated breath. Joining us on the broadcast is also our panel of guests and expert, Mr. Pawan Duggal, who's a cyber law expert, is joining us on the broadcast. Andy Wilkins, who's a freelance journalist, is also with us on the broadcast. Professor Damian Tambini, who's a professor at the London School of Economics, is also with us on the show. Thank you, gentlemen, for being a part of the show tonight. Mr. Duggal, I'm coming to you first. The implications or the message for India, what can we expect?
Expect a new avatar of Twitter. It is the winds of new change that are blowing in. And if you look at what Elon Musk has done in the first one day of taking charges, he's got marching orders for the top 4 officials of the company, giving a strong message to the company: you either will adhere to the new vision or be prepared to exit. But more significantly, I expect this particular Twitter to grow tremendously in terms as a political tool for increasing the political influence of Elon Musk as not just the richest industrialist or the guy in the world, but more significantly, the most powerful media personality across the social media. Why? Because Twitter is something special. It's being used by all the heads of the states, political leaders, bureaucrats, celebrities, and thinkers. So it's the best way and the only source for all kinds of news, for all news agencies and news organizations. So I expect a lot of change. I expect more criticism to be allowed, to be ventilated. I would expect the algorithms to be tweaked in such a manner that the critical tweets are not subdued or hidden below other tweets. I expect more effective remedies and redress mechanisms to be made available to the users who have now been facing utmost trolling, cyber harassment, and nuisance on Twitter. which Twitter has not been able to address.
No, Mr. Dugal, I completely agree with you that the manner in which we must frame this entire discussion, as I go to my other guest as well, is what are the political implications of it, not in terms of A or B political party, but as Mr. Dugal was pointing out, there's a huge implication of social media when it comes to political discourses and our political choices, whether it's academics or whether it's, in the public discourse and researches. It has been shown that social media can influence the manner in which you vote, the manner in which you make choices, more importantly, how you consume information. On that note, Professor Tambini, I'm coming to you. The takeover by Elon Musk, what does it signify? And the political shift, if I were to talk to you about that, what kind of shift can be witnessed?
Well, it remains to be seen. There's been criticism from both sides of bias in the algorithm. And I think that just adds weight to the claims for regulation and transparency to be improved. But I think Musk has so far said he wants to do two things. He wants to build some kind of super app, a little bit like the Chinese Alibaba app, to roll in all kinds of things like e-commerce services into this app. And he also wants to create a platform for free speech. And I think he's going to find out very quickly, and if you'll excuse the pun, that whilst he thinks free speech isn't rocket science, he's going to find out he's on a steep learning curve very, very quickly.
And why do you say that?
The reason that he has to think much harder about free speech is that his assumption, I think he assumes that he can, by promoting free speech, just cut out a lot of costs for Twitter. Say, reduce the costs in content moderation, which have gone up hugely in recent years. But that's not going to be the case for various reasons. Advertisers are going to push him to moderate because of brand risk.
Yes.
There is a huge raft of regulation coming down the pipe, the Digital Services Act in the EU, which is going to oblige Twitter to invest more, not less, in content moderation. And users themselves will also continue to call for safety. Because after all, this is a journey Twitter's been on before. Jack Dorsey started the company with a very radical philosophy of freedom of speech. And he was dragged kicking and screaming to much more content moderation, much more protection of users.
Professor Tambini, allow me an interjection here. Allow me an interjection here before I go to Andy Wilkins.
I think Musk isn't going in the same direction.
Musk is going in the same direction is what you're saying. If social media and the tools in social media can lead to revolutions, big changes, reform, it may also pave way for chaos and anarchy. And that's the fear which many people are talking about. Is that an overblown concern or perhaps a legitimate one?
Well, if you'll permit me, I think it's a simplistic one in many ways. I think obviously we can see events like the Arab Spring, which was initially greeted as a great liberation for the region from autocracy. But then later we saw precisely the kind of problems of chaos when a political vacuum was exploited by particular political actors. So I think it's simplistic to say that it's either democracy or chaos. I think what we're seeing is a longer term wave of learning, and the regulation that I mentioned, which is being particularly in Europe devised, is trying to strike a subtle balance. It's trying to bring the rule of law onto platforms. So free speech, of course, is not absolute, as Musk is going to learn. It is balanced with other rights and with the rights of others. And the process of bringing rights onto these dominant platforms, giving some kind of accountability to citizens and making sure that Elon Musk is not he himself the judge of balancing those rights is what must be done, and it's going to take some time. There are problems of potential censorship in this new regulatory turn. But Musk himself met with Thierry Breton, who is the European Commissioner designing and leading on the new regulations coming out of Brussels. And I think he understands that for all the bluster about free speech, he is going to have to design some smart solutions. And do you agree with what
Professor Tambani is saying, that that's going to be a learning curve for him, and he'll get to know very, very soon that free speech, as he talks about it, is not an absolutist argument. There are rules, there are laws of the land in Europe and other parts of the world, here in India, that Twitter will have to comply with. Andy?
Oh yeah, like fully agree. Like this isn't just going to be like 5 minutes later and Elon has got what he has achieved. It's going to take a gradual amount of time. You know, they say Rome wasn't built in a day. It's going to be the exact same case for Elon Musk and Twitter at the end of the day. That's how you have to see it. Realistically, especially in the UK, in the sports scene, social media has come under severe scrutiny for the amount of abuse that is launched at football players, for example. Elon Musk has got to get on top of the abuse in the same way the likes of Instagram, Facebook and other platforms are also being told you've got to get on top of it, or otherwise you risk getting fined, you risk getting punished in the long run. So ultimately, it's not going to be, 5 minutes later, I've got everything sorted. He's going to have to find out what works and what doesn't work. Yes, he may enter himself in for some scrutiny throughout the next 6 months to say 18 months, potentially. It could be before we actually see a proper change. But this is a man who, in himself, he obviously will be wanting to he will obviously be eyeing the pound sign wherever he can. So if he can milk out a few quid out of advertisers, etc., by all means, he will go down that line. But ultimately, he has got to realise there is a line that shouldn't be crossed. If he allows that extreme amount or that extreme group of way of life to come back onto the platform, then ultimately that is where he can unfortunately see a downfall, perhaps. And maybe, who knows, he may not get his 44 billion back if he ever decides to sell it again. He's the richest man.
He, I'm sure, knows that. Mr. Dugal, I'm coming to you. Translate that for, Twitter, politically speaking, is a contested social media space, whether it's about the announcements of the government, the left, the right, the center, whether it's about contested history or polity. That's where the discourse is building these days. When it comes to a country like India, and we recently had the intermediary guidelines, just about an hour ago, we reported how the government of India wants more and more compliance, and this includes companies like Twitter and Facebook. With this takeover, compliance in India, how does that really fit in?
Well, I think with this takeover, compliance is going to be a logical block that's going to come onto the landscape. For the richest man in the world, he knows that for getting the right monies, he has to do utmost focus on compliance. And as you rightly pointed out an hour before, the new amendments to the Information Technology Rules 2021 have been announced and notified, which effectively means that far more compliance will be required to be done by Twitter in the Indian context. Unfortunately, the previous management of Twitter had taken a confrontationist approach vis-a-vis Indian authorities and Indian law by saying that, look, we are above the law and that we will not comply with Indian law. No wonder Twitter found itself last year, after the expiry of the statutory period of compliance, that they got exposed to 4 different FIRs in 4 different states for criminal action, which they are now going ahead and...
We've lost that line with Mr. Dugal. Professor Tambani, I'm coming to you. Whether the algorithm of Twitter is tilted towards the left or the right, there is no transparency for a particular user. And right now, I'm talking purely from the point of view of a user, of citizen, which should know how the information is being generated, how it is being consumed. Can we imagine a day and age where there could be some kind of transparency in terms of how algorithms are functioning, how our data is being used? We talk so much about disclosure and privacy policies as to what extent these companies should make that disclosure to individuals. But the user and its data, and I see this rather provocatively, is up for manipulation by either side and depending on how they want to use it. Professor Tambani.
Well, that's one of the things that the new regulatory settlement in Europe is designed to deal with.
Yep.
So it's for 10 years now we've been having these debates about how to make these hugely influential algorithms that could potentially change the course of elections, for example, how they are designed, what is the special source that decides which tweet appears at the top of your feed.
Yeah.
It's obviously crucial to know more about that, and large companies have consistently refused to open them up. I would, however, even go a stage further. Yes, absolutely, we need better transparency. The new European laws and laws around the world will argue for that. But I think that there are other things that could be done. For example, the international NGO Article 19 has asked for the unbundling of those algorithms that determine relevance to news feeds, so that they are separate from the main advertising industry of the platform and potentially opened up to other providers, as well as transparency for those algorithms. I would say, however, that all of these measures, to the extent that they're backed up by regulators and the law, could go both ways. So in more authoritarian countries, they could be used to shut down the ability of platforms to provide open and democratic platforms for debate.
Interesting.
So in Europe, all of these laws will be subject to the European Convention on Human Rights and the protections for freedom of speech in the law.
Okay.
And whilst the UN has multiple international charters for free speech, it's only really in Europe where you have a court which is able to protect those fundamental rights of free speech against governments. That's not the case, for example, in India. So it's quite important, as we put these safeguards in place, as we open up the algorithms, as we put new regulatory obligations, if you like, to civilize these platforms, that there are checks and balances and there are protections for free speech, because Twitter is not only a speaker, if you like, it's also a platform for the speech of others. And it raises a number of really new technical and difficult issues in free speech.
And that unbundling bit,
that we're going to have to
Professor Tammany,
work through.
I've lost 1 minute. I've lost 1 minute.
Democratic governments and also international organizations as well.
Yes, Andy, I want to give you that one last minute that I have on the broadcast. The unbundling of the algorithms, putting the user in the center. It's a double-edged argument, as the professor rightly said, because in more authoritarian regimes, you could have the government misusing the data, or in an alternate scenario, you could have these large corporations who do not really have the kind of disclosure that they should really have. In the next few days, in the next few years, as the jurisprudence develops, in the interest of the citizens, at least in the EU, not in the UK per se, perhaps there are rules that have caught up with the rise of these big social media giants.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like, there's no two ways about it. I think as we've become more developed as a society, whether it be in the UK, the EU, all over the world, we've become, as these social media giants have grown, ultimately governments across the land have taken notice of what these social media companies are doing. They're now rising up and saying, look, we want to put these policies in place. You have to meet them, or otherwise we're going to ban you. We're going to shut you down. And it's very
Andy, I'm very sorry I'm interrupting you there. I'm completely out of time, but I appreciate you joining us on the broadcast, Professor Tammany, Andy Wilkins. We also had Mr. Pavan Duggal. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on the broadcast. This way or the other, it should always be the data of you and me, our privacy, and how the corporations and governments which are using it. That should be the point of focus. With that, it's a wrap. Ayushman joins you on the other side.